So in the real-time space, if you look at, there are great characters coming from a number of different game studios, but they often, there's also, to be perfectly frank, plenty of game characters that don't look great. You might be able to say the same thing about visual effects, but I think there's been a leveling up in visual effects where the general quality of digital doubles is pretty high at this point. That's a sort of an artifact of the medium itself. It has to be high quality to fool an audience. Whereas the games world, there's much more varied constraints, right? Sometimes it just needs to work on a mobile phone. Sometimes it needs to run at 60 frames per second, and so on. Within the context of Unreal, characters had been a focus of the cinematics and the work that they've done for a number of years, but some of the materials that go into characters, the most prominent ones being skin, hair, eyes, and cloth, were the focus of our work over the last 6 months to a year. So we put together a new material for eyes that includes refraction of the iris, caustics within the iris, subsurface scattering in the whites of the eye. We've iterated on the subsurface scattering approach that's just used for skin. We've added a new means to do hair that actually looks quite nice, and we've added a new shading model for cloth. So these are all really the basic sort of building blocks to doing digital characters. And so that's been an element where we've sort of looked at each of the pieces and building on the existing physically based shading model that was our physically based shading sort of approach that has been built into Unreal over the last couple of years. We extended that to really have a set of materials that are designed to allow game creators to make humans or digital humans that are on par with the best in the industry. So Paragon is a new game coming out that features basically a series of characters, 5-on-5 or 6-on-6, where individual players work as teams to fight against each other. Sort of a MOBA, capture the flag sort of gameplay. And as such, there are a lot of characters. And so the Paragon trailer, Paragon announced trailer, was a way of showing gamers what the environment's going to look like and what many of the featured hero characters will look like. So it's a 2-minute piece set in the world of Paragon, or the main level of Paragon, featuring players on either side, starting on either side of the map and rushing toward each other and doing battle. So there are huge sort of monster Leviathan characters. There are lithe, super fast moving humanoid robots, and there are humans mixed in. And so it was quite a challenge in terms of touching sort of every possible material under the sun and doing it at scale, and then turning it into an animated piece that would stand up to gamer critique. So I helped build materials into the engine, the new cloth shading model and the new eye material for basically prior to sort of the real production of the animated piece. And then I went on site to Epic Games' office in Cary in North Carolina, and helped, in that case, light a number of shots in the trailer. I think so from a purely kind of Unreal focus, there is the fact that yes, the game engine can now do materials that it couldn't do before. It can sort of achieve a certain level of visual quality that it couldn't before. So purely focused on that as a product, you have your bullet points. From a sort of broader industry perspective, I think a lot of people are looking at Unreal because it is free to use. It's free to use until you start selling a game, but I believe that in the offline context, it's just free to use, period. There is no licensing fee when you're producing linear content. So if you're a visual effects studio or a previs studio or a production, movie production house looking to use a real-time engine in your visual effects or film production process, you can now start to look at that and really think, well, look at that, look at the quality of that character. If I see that on set through my virtual camera, does that tell me everything I need to know? It very well might. So I think that it's something that as the games and film world looks at the next round of projects that they're doing, they can take notice and consider whether or not they would want to use Unreal in those productions. So the Paragon trailer team, I want to say, was between 20 and 30 people working for about 8 to 12 weeks, producing, effectively taking game engine assets that were already produced for Paragon and for the game, and bringing them into shots lined up specifically for the trailer, and then applying shot-specific lighting to those assets. So managing a fairly big world is always a challenge. The level itself is it's big because it's intended to allow for lots of different gameplay and lots of different replay scenarios, and so using the tools to sort of work in that space was a challenge at times. It was interesting also to light a character. We were very lucky in that for the trailer we weren't constrained to be exactly 30 frames per second or exactly 60 frames per second, because we knew we would be saving out frames at the end. So it didn't have to be exactly interactive. I believe that at this point, if you look at on the latest hardware, I think we've actually achieved that level of interactivity, but for the production, that wasn't a requirement. So we were actually able to use a ton of, way more lights than you would in a traditional game context. So that was one of my initial expectations that would be a challenge. Turned out that it wasn't at all. It was actually quite functional. So you could light in a way that was much more close to the way you would do on a traditional visual effects set. Well, so this is a brand new game. So this was an introduction to the world, and I think one of the points one of the big points of the trailer was that this is a beautiful world. So you're playing a MOBA game, but you're doing it in a world that looks like the highest quality AAA game that you've played. A lot of the MOBA games tend to be a little bit lower fidelity graphics, and so I think that was one goal of the trailer was to really show the visual bar that the game is hitting, or trying to hit. So that was probably the single biggest element from a sort of visual presentation perspective. And aside from that, it was the first official real piece of artwork to come out about the game. There had been individual vignettes on a few of the characters that came out before that trailer, but this was the first piece to really show the world and show a lot of the action as it will play out in the game itself. Adding in more functionality into the engine and producing more pieces. So we spent some time working towards building another 2-minute short for GDC. That was a collaboration between Epic and Ninja Theory, a company in the UK working on a game called Hellblade. So that was another chance to sort of push the character technology and the materials that went into them. And then we also started to add features like grading controls that worked with the Academy's ACES system, and the ability to output to HDR displays, which, for my money, are one of the greatest sort of advents of new technology in the last couple of years. So it's fun to work with an engine that's just really actively in development and really have it sort of address and add support for the newest features and newest technologies on the market. So I'm actively working on a couple projects in the VR space. I absolutely, the bug has bitten me. If you ask anybody, I've got a Ricoh Theta that I love to pull out and take panoramic photos wherever I can. And the sense of presence in a virtual space that you get with a VR experience is, it's compelling. It's very, very compelling. I think there are applications in the traditional media space. There are applications in the broadcast space. There are certainly applications in the professional space. There feels like we're just scratching the surface of ways you can use VR, and with the advent of the HoloLens, the Magic Leap, the Meta, the AR side of things is really only expanding, the ways that what we thought of as just a sort of siloed off world of computer graphics, they're now becoming much more applicable to just sort of general users. Things that you can see your parents or your siblings or your loved ones using in a way that you wouldn't beyond saying, pointing at something on screen and saying, I helped work on that. So the VR space is exciting. There's a ton going on there, and of course, yes, I'm interested. So FMX, for the number of times I've been here, is always an impressive collection of speakers, an impressive collection of subject matter, and it brings those elements together in a context that feels really familiar and cozy, to use a somewhat informal, formal way to phrase it. It's great to be able to interact with so many people from across the spectrum of film production, visual effects, and now there's more growing presence of the games, game space, and you get to hear really in a way that it's much more direct, I think, than other conferences. You get to hear how people are approaching problems, what worked, what didn't. It has a lot of the feel of a SIGGRAPH from a few years back, which SIGGRAPH is always one of my favorite conferences, and FMX has a lot of the feeling that I look forward to in that context. I'll pause. I don't know if that's a bad thing to say if you don't want me to mention SIGGRAPH.
No, SIGGRAPH,
but
that's perfectly fine.
Okay. I mean, so well, I guess I'll stop there then.
It's
but, yeah.
great.